Hi you guys, last week we made pinch pots. We combined them to create closed forms, and now we are going to manipulate those shapes a little bit to create the basic shape, body shape of your superheroes. So if you want your shape to be oval, you're going to elongate it a little bit by rolling it on the table. If you want it to be square or rectangle, you're going to tap it so you get some right angles. Okay, from there, we're going to start adding the limbs, the props, the facial expressions. I'm going to show you how to work with tin foil. Hopefully you have some of this in your house. Actually, it's aluminum foil, not tin foil. It's aluminum foil and toothpicks. These will be very helpful. Not mandatory, but very helpful. Because we're going to be working a little bit larger, this is going to help with your structure. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, it'll be helpful to have your picture out in front of you. Take a look at your shape and decide if you need to adjust it in any way. So if you have a square piece, you're going to tap it on the table and get some round right angles. If you have an oval, you're going to elongate it a little bit. Use your small sculpting tool, your sharper sculpting tool, and very lightly draw in the lines so you have a sense of where things go. If you make a mistake, you can just smooth it over with water and redo it. So these are just surface lines. They're not deep. So you can get a sense of orientation and proportion. Using tightly twisted foil will really help to support things that stick out, such as arms and legs and wings and things like that. Once you're satisfied with the shape that you've created with the armature, you can start adding details. I'm adding a magic wand with a toothpick. Then I'm going to take some soft clay and start forming it around the armature. Notice that I have a little container of water and a damp sponge, and I'm using that quite generously so that the clay will form and stick to the foil. And I'm just adding a little bit at a time and blending it as I go. Once you're satisfied with that, you're going to use the round part of your sculpting tool and make a dent. This dent is actually quite a bit deeper than the socket that you're used to making. It's more like a hole, really. And then you're simply going to sink your attachment, in this case it's my arm. I'm going to sink it into that hole so that it's very secure, and then weld and blend with my sculpting tool. And per usual, you're going to add a reinforcement coil with a little bit of water and weld that. And that's going to help it integrate, and it's going to help it attach. This is very much like the stem you did on your pumpkin. Go ahead and add all of your attachments in the same way. In this case, I'm adding an arm, and I am adjusting the position of the arm once it's put on. I want it to look like her hand is on her hip. So I'm not able to put an entire reinforcement coil around the arm because of how it's situated. So instead, I'm adding little pieces of clay and using it as a reinforcement coil. So I'm adding reinforcement clay rather than a coil. It's the same thing, really. Use your sculpting tool to start welding, blending, and identifying the shapes, articulating the shapes. So another technique that you've already practiced is pressing. I recommend using this technique to identify or create things that are flatter, that aren't very three-dimensional, such as clothes. So pressing is basically one step away from drawing. So rather than scratching your lines in, you're actually pressing, and this gives it a sense of volume and a sense of 3D. You did this with your pumpkin lines. So I'm simply pressing around the lines that I've sort of drew at the beginning of the sculpture, and now I'm pressing them in, and it's creating a sense of volume. Now to add feet, you can use your round sculpting tool and create your holes, score, and add quite a generous amount of water all the way around. I've already created the attachments with my foil, and you can sort of stick them in there and get a sense of proportion and if that looks how you want it. And then once you decide it is, then go ahead and start adding the very soft clay around your armature to create the shoes or the boots or whatever structure is holding your superhero up. And remember always to add reinforcement clay as needed to fill in any gaps. Sometimes you have to repress any marks that you may have erased. So there's several different ways you can go about adding hats or helmets. Most of you created hats with your pumpkin already. You can use that technique. If you want to try something different, you can make a little pinch pot, and then you fill the pinch pot with some foil. In this case, my superhero has a little propeller on the top of her hat. So I added a toothpick, and that's going to help secure it. It's also going to serve as part of my propeller. So that's optional. Then you're going to score and slip it, just like you would any other attachment, and weld and blend. I'm using my fingers right now, but you can use your sculpting tool. It's always a good idea to keep your sculpting tool clean. I like to wipe the blending edge off with a sponge periodically so it doesn't scratch the area I'm trying to blend. There's several different ways you can add eyes and goggles and glasses and things like that. I'm starting out with little balls that I've flattened out to discs, and then I'm going to use my needle tool to press in the eye. These are going to be goggles. And before I score and slip them down, I want to make sure that they're relatively equal. I'm pretty satisfied with that. So to attach them, you have to be super careful because they're very tiny. Still use a score and slip method. You don't have to weld things that are this small, but you do need to press them a little bit. So I'm pressing it, putting a little bit of pressure without distorting the shape. And do that for both of your eyes. So hopefully you're getting the sense that it's important to add all the bulky things first, and then once you do that, you can start adding details. In this case, I'm adding some pockets and a toothpick in the pocket, and that's going to simulate a pencil, so I'll make that more clear with paint. And then for this side pocket, where I want to put an iPhone in the pocket, I actually am pressed out a hole so that I can put the iPhone into this pocket. So I'm creating a pocket that has more dimension to it. In other words, it's going to be a functional pocket. So every time you do that, you're going to notice that the clay gets stressed a little bit and it will crack. That's just natural. And so you're going to repair that with your sculpting tool and a little bit of water. I'm actually shaping this using my picture and shaping the phone according to my picture, and then I'm going to cut it down and it should fit securely. So I would say this is a good stopping point for me, but I still would like to work on it some more to refine it and add some more details. So in the meantime, what I'm going to do is cover it up with a piece of saran wrap or plastic and then put it into my clay bucket and try to keep it safe and airtight without smashing it. Put the lid on super tightly and be sure to wrap it with saran wrap before you put the lid on, or else it will dry out. There is air inside that bucket.